Hello everyone, and welcome to another Logz.io training webinar presented by the Customer Success team. My name is Adam Kazas, and I'm a Customer Success Engineer here at Logz.io. Please feel free to keep your questions for the end of the webinar. We will be answering them. And if you were wondering, we are going to share this presentation with anyone who signed up for the webinar. So in terms of agenda, we're going to talk about the benefits of visualizations, to showcase some advanced visualizations and features, and build an operational dashboard, hopefully within 20 minutes. So a short recap of previous webinars that we did related to visualizing data in general. So why even use visualizations? So visual representation of data is easier to grasp. It will be much easier to find problematic spikes in a visualized way rather than through text. It's also very easy to scale, so no matter the amount of logs that you ship into Kibana, Kibana will aggregate this data for you. It's efficient for troubleshooting, so it's mainly at the initial and final stages of an investigation. It's easy to see if an issue started or when an issue ended. And multiple sources of data aggregated to a single dashboard, meaning that you can create an overview of the health of your environment, including different types of logs in a single dashboard. So you probably ask yourself in any given time, what is the health of my system? If you have an issue, so what environment is affected, what geolocation is affected? But ultimately, when facing a critical issue, you're probably interested to know what is the root cause, so what actually begins all of this. So with that, let me show you some tips and tricks within Kibana's visualizations, and then we'll move forward to actually compile visualizations into a single dashboard that will help you troubleshoot this kind of issues. So today I would like to talk about the importance of aggregation order, so the date histogram before field aggregation and vice versa. We'll also show some gauge techniques with average bucketing, and we can actually use filters to categorize multiple values under a single label using the queries to filter your data. So to begin, I would like to talk about the importance of aggregation. So in Kibana, the order of which we sort the different splits and aggregation actually affects our results. Bucket aggregations don't calculate metrics over fields like the metrics aggregation do, but instead they create buckets of documents. In other words, the buckets effectively define document sets in addition to the bucket themselves, and the bucket aggregation also computes and returns the number of documents that fell into this bucket. So I know that everything I just said sounds very complex, so let me just show you what that means literally in Kibana. So if I'll go and create a visualization, let's say I want to create a line chart because I want to see something over time. So I'm going to create from a new search, and right from the get-go, all I get is a simple count, a dot on this line chart. So I will change this to the last 4 hours just so I can get a bigger count. And the first thing I'm going to do is create the date histogram. So I click on the x-axis on the aggregation, and the first option will be the date histogram. When I apply the changes, we will now see the logs going over time. Now you can see that Kibana already determines the interval between the dots automatically, and you can actually see the interval underneath. So every dot here represents 5 minutes. Next, I would like to take, let's say, a field. I would like to take a field that I know that I have a lot of values for. So I'm going to add a split into this line, and I want to break it down according to this field. So I'm going to use the terms aggregation, which is basically just selecting a field name that you want to break down. And I'm going to write down the request field. Now, as you can see, the order by is according to the count, meaning that I should expect to see the top 5 results that are showing up the most in this line chart. When I click on apply, however, let's give it a second to load. When I click on apply, I can see on the right side that I have way more than 5 results. Now, this is due to the fact that Kibana is actually looking at the order of which the buckets are arranged and then returns the results. So in this case, what I get effectively right now is I get the top 5 results, but for every 5 minutes. So every dot here, I get the different top 5 results that you would expect. Now, this is neither right or wrong. There could be a case where you actually want to receive this kind of results, but in case you just want to see the total top 5, the global top 5 results according to the global time picker, you can simply just drag the priority of the terms aggregation on top of the timestamp aggregation, click on apply, and then you would see the actual top 5 results. So now that we've covered this one, I would like to move to the next one, which is to talk about a bit about the gauge techniques that we have. So I'll return to visualize, open a new visualization, and go to the gauge one. So right now I get a metric that shows a count, a simple count. So a use case to relate on why we would want to use something like an average bucket is when you visualize something within a dashboard in Kibana, all the visualizations are affected by the time frame that you select. So if I use a normal, let's say average on something, the average calculation will move along with the time picker. So when I monitor my system, I'd rather the average calculation that it would refer to short time periods, like a few minutes, and not to be affected by the time picker globally. So let's see how that will look. If I do like an average, and I just want to see the average response codes that I receive, I can click on play. I will get this average. Now let's narrow it down to problematic response code. So I would go with type Apache Access, and the response should be between 400 to 599. And now I get this average. Now, if I change it from 4 hours to, let's say, 24 hours, the average would pretty much stay the same. So this is not something I'm looking to achieve. I'd actually like to see what happened between smaller intervals. So this is what will be different when I select the average bucket. When I select the average bucket, basically what would happen is the regular average and the average bucket is the difference between them is that the average bucket divides the time frame into time intervals, calculates the average of each interval, and finally presenting an average of all the intervals together. So I get smaller intervals with an average, so when a spike appears, it'll be easier to represent using this method. Now you can also select what kind of interval you want. In my case, I would like it to be every 10 minutes. So when I click on play, you can see that the numbers that I would receive are significantly different than before. This gives a more indication of what happens per 10 minutes in my environment rather than just in the total 24 hours. Now, since I'm familiar also with the numbers that I would consider to be good or bad in this situation, so I will make a bit changes here. You can do it through the options tab and then scroll down to the ranges section. So I'm going to change this to numbers that makes more sense to this environment that I'm on. Click on apply, and that's it. So I'm going to save actually this visualization. We're going to use it later in our dashboard. Give it a name. And I would actually like to do the exact same thing, but this time I don't want to see the average of the bad response that I get. I actually want to see what's the average for the good response that I get, because I also need an indication for that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to simply reverse the color scheme here by going to color options, and then you can just reverse the scheme. So we're going from red to green. Usually more of something when it comes to the 200 response is better, but then I'm going to tinker a bit the numbers here as well. Let me do that quickly. All right. And I'm going to save this one as well as a new visualization. You can just click here and save as new. I'm going to call this 200. Great. So now we went over this. This is the second, a bit more advanced technique that Kibana provides. And I would like to now show you how to use actually filters and categorize multiple values under a single label. So to do that, we're going to go back to visualize, click on plus, and then I'm going to select the data table visualization. And in here, what I get from the get-go is just the basic count. So now I want to break it down in this specific example, I want to see the different operating systems that are accessing my environment. So I'm going to split the rows. I'm going to select the terms aggregation. And here, I'm going to select OS. I want to see the top, let's say, 10 results. Oops. And as you can see, I received different values. However, you can see that Windows, I have 3 different kind of Windows, and the versions don't really matter to me. So I would like to aggregate them into a single label. So to do that, instead of using the terms aggregation, you can use the filters aggregation. And then Kibana allows you to write a query that will fit what you want to categorize. So in this case, I'm going to say that OS needs to be Windows with a wildcard at the end, so it will match 7, XP, and Vista. And clicking on the label icon here, I will label this as Windows. Please keep in mind that the query is exactly like Lucene, so it's case sensitive. If I would write it with a small w and not a capital one, it wouldn't work. So when I click on apply, now we get a single row that counts all the Windows versions that are affected by this query. So I'm going to continue and add more filters. The next one will need to be the Android one. I saw I had a couple of those as well. So I'm going to do OS Android with the Android label. And I can basically do that anything else besides these two should be other, because I'm not really interested in them, just for the example's sake. So I can do not OS Windows and not OS Android, and I'll just classify this as other. So now I get the rest in another option. So I'm going to save this one as well. Great. So next, I would like to create a heat map as well. So a heat map is a good use case when you want to see how many of something was affected during a particular time frame. So for this example, I'll actually like to create a heat map for the different URLs that people are accessing on my website, but I want to see over a date histogram, over a time period. I want to see when it was accessed the most. So I'm going to begin by placing my requests on the y-axis, because I want to see them on the left side of this table. So I'm going to create it according to the terms. The field name is called request, and I'm going to see the top 10 results for that one. Now, I already know from the get-go that this one doesn't really interest me because it's something internal on my end. So you can basically click on advanced down here and you can exclude this option. So instead of creating a filter around it, I can just exclude it from the available results that Kibana is returning. And to that, I want to add now on the x-axis, I want to add a date histogram. So now I can see the different time periods and when a URL was accessed the most. Now in the options, you can also change the number of colors to make it a bit more variant if you want. However, for my example, I would actually like it to be with less colors. And I'll also change the scheme to go from yellow to red. And I will save this as a new visualization as well. Awesome. Keep in mind that since I'm familiar with my logs, this obviously is taking a bit faster, but this is something that you should do as well with your own logs. So you should get familiarized with them, understand like what you want to find, but notice that what I'm basically doing right now is taking all of my Apache Access logs and I'm breaking them down into small visualizations. So let's continue. The next is a line chart that shows me the different response codes that I have. So I'm going to click on plus, select the line chart, I'm going to start from scratch. And in here, I want to actually specify, I want to look for something very specific. So again, I want to see everything between the 400 and 599 response codes. And I'm going to add a date histogram. But now I want to break the date histogram into the different response codes. So I should use the terms aggregation, select the response. Let's change to top 10, although I know there are less. Now I have a breakdown of this. Now, as you remember before, now I get the top 5 results for each 30 minutes, but in this case, it actually fits my use case because I'd like to see what happens in each interval separately due to this environment. Now you can also go to the metrics and axis. I like to change the line mode to smooth, just so it's a bit more appealing. I'm going to save this one. And next, we're going to work a bit with the donuts and the pie charts, as Kibana called them. However, they have a hole in the middle, so it's no longer a pie. So I'm going to create a donut. I'm going to create 2 donuts, actually. One of them will show the browser plus the version on top of that, and then I'm going to create one for the devices. So for this one, I need another terms aggregation. I need to go to the field that's called name. This is basically the browsers. I want to change it to top 10 as well. And I see the different browsers now on the right-hand side. I could use the filter aggregation as well, but in this case, I also want to break it down to different versions that are running for each one of these. So I'm going to actually take away the filter out the other browser. And then I'm going to add another split, which will show me the version. And the version, the name of that field is called major. I'll give it top 10 results. So now what we see is basically this is the inner circle, or the inner donut is the browser name. And anything outside will actually show the different versions. So for Firefox, we have version 9 and 10. For Chrome, we have version, what is the small sliver, 48, 16, and 17, and so on. So let's save this one as well. And now I'd also like to create another one. So I don't actually need to exit and turn back. I'll just remove the aggregations I have now and just start from scratch. And I'm going to create a donut that shows me the different devices that are entering my, my website. So again, in this case, I'm going to remove the other since it doesn't provide a lot of value. I could also exclude it from underneath. And once that's done, we'll actually move and we'll create a coordinate map that shows the different geolocations. So now I can select Save as a new visualization. So now I'm going to create a heat map, a coordinate map. So the coordinate map is based on the IP address field. So if you have an IP address field and you want to enrich it with Geoip information, just let our support know. It's something that we can do on our end. You don't need to take care of anything on yours. Just make sure that you have this IP address field. And I can show you what you can achieve by enriching the logs with Geoip enrichment. So you go into the coordinates visualization, and you select the Geoip location, click on apply, and now we would see the different zones and areas in the world that people accessed your website. And I'm going to filter this again to show me only the problematic ones. I don't really care about the ones that for this particular example, about those who were able to access. In order for me to find the troubleshoot the issues, I want to see the ones that could not. So we can see that the North American region, in this case, had the most. You have multiple options to select from if you want the map type to be changed to a heat map. Let's say if you find it more appealing, I'll keep it with the scaled circle markers. So let's save this one as well. Okay. Up next, we can actually do some markdowns to give a bit more context to the visualization and dashboard that we're going to create. So the markdown is basically a way to add text. You can add headers, you can add links, and you can add it as a visualization inside. So I want to basically emphasize that this is going to be an Apache Access visualization. Forgot the space. And you can give some information down here if you want to add a bit more context. I can save this as the markdown. Now, another thing I would like to do is actually have a link from my Apache Access dashboard to my backend dashboard. So to do that, let's access this backend dashboard. It's called All Prod Health. So I have a few visualizations here to show me backend logs. I can see the different exceptions. I can see some timeline here. So what I need is the actual link to this dashboard. So I'm going to click on share. You can get a link over here. I can change this into a shortcut. I'll go back to visualize. And I'll give this a name like this. And we can call this investigate backend. So this will be the text for the link, and the link can be added into the parenthesis. So now we have this as a link within the dashboard itself. I would like it to be opened as a new link as well. So let's save this one as a new visualization. All right. Last but not least, we want to add the actual logs into the dashboard. So after we make all the changes, after we start our investigation, we also want to look at the actual logs themselves. So you can add a saved search as a visualization into a dashboard. So to do that, basically all I need to do is say what I'm looking to query here. In this case, I want all the logs. So I want the filters to be done on the dashboard level. So I'm just going to save this as all logs. Let's give it the naming convention that I've used so far. So now this can be added as a visualization later. So now if I go back to the dashboard, this is the time where we need to compile all of this into a single dashboard. So because I created a very comfortable naming convention for this, it shouldn't take me too long to actually put everything in place. So all I need to do is click on add, right down the beginning, and we can start adding the stuff. So I like the line chart with the two gauges to be, actually no, the browser and the device. So let's start with that. So I'd like to make this a bit smaller. Next to each other over here. It's a bit too big. This is always fun, arranging the dashboard. This seems like the right height. Okay, up next we have the Geoip that we created. That can be added over here. It seems like a good size. I will then take the two gauges that I created. And up next we have the heat map. Oh, I actually need to add the markdown. That's right. So the markdown will be on top of everything, as this should be the header of all the visualization. Maybe something like this. So we have the heat map, have the filter table, and I think that's it. This can be slightly bigger. Let's decrease this one. I'm going to talk about a bit the arrangement that I decided to go with here once I'm done. So bear with me. And underneath all of this, let's add the markdown that we created for the backend. We can split it like this. And as I've said before, we can add the saved search that we created. And this actually shows all of the logs. And I'll actually put this on top of the backend one and expand it a bit. Once you're done, click on save. You can store the time with the dashboard itself. All right, so now let's go over what we actually created and how is it useful to investigate and troubleshoot the issue. So right from the get-go, I can already see I've got this peak over here, but let's assume that I received an alert on Slack, let's say that I have excessive 500 errors. So I would like to go into this and understand why. So just by zooming over this portion, the rest of the visualizations will change accordingly as well. So I'll zoom a bit more. And you can already see that the gauge that we created before with the errors is going red because we have way more than what we expect. And the 200 one is declining to the yellow section. Now, I can already basically either dismiss or approve a few stuff just by glimpsing at the visualizations that we created. So I can already see that this is not something that is affecting a specific browser or a specific version, because I see that the donut basically filled. I don't see any specific devices over here as well. I do, however, see that I have a lot of errors coming in the North American region and some in Europe. And if I keep scrolling down, I can see that basically I have two sites that are affected the most. Oh, this was actually not excluded completely, but what I care about more is the cart one. It means that I'm actually losing money right now because people can't access in this time period my website. Now I can also see that this doesn't really affect a specific operating system, even though the other section takes a lot. But if this was broken down, I would probably see the same thing. So if I'll keep scrolling down, I can see the different logs that are coming in, but they don't really provide me a lot of insight. So this is where I would feel, since I've seen this cart/go, that this perhaps might come from a backend issue. Now, when I receive this alert, if I'll go back to my Slack channel, I can see that I have a small playbook over here that specifies what I should do. So I should check the warning level logs, and I should determine if this was caused by an exception or not. So I can click now on Investigate Backend. This will open the dashboard that shows my backend logs that we've seen before. And now I can continue my investigation. So I'm going to filter the warning level logs, as was mentioned. And I can see two kinds of exception popping up. I can see something that looks more like a symptom rather than a root cause. I see a lot of transaction aborted sessions over here. So I would assume that this small sliver over here in the exceptions should show me basically the exception that I'm looking for. And once I filter that, I can actually go in, zoom in, I can see the stack trace, and this is probably where I should implement my fix. Now both of these can be pinned, and you can move back to the Discover tab and continue your investigation over here. But as you've seen, the initial investigation was taking place using visualized data, and only afterwards when I need to actually do the drill down, I'm able to go into the dashboards and go back to Discover and continue my investigation over here. So this basically concludes the training part of the webinar. I'll be happy to answer some questions now if you guys have them. So I can see one question on if you can create an alert directly from a dashboard. So you can do it directly from the dashboard. However, as you've seen, when I was inside the dashboard, when I clicked on the pin, this basically allows me to carry over the filters with me when I go back to the Discover tab. So when I'm in the Discover tab, and let's assume that I want to create an alert based on these filters, clicking on Create Alert, I just continue regularly from here. So this, I was able to find what's the problem using the dashboard, and then I carry the filter with me back to Discover, and I continue to create the alert from here. Let's see if there's more questions coming in. Yes, we will be sending out the replay for this. There's a question if we can show an example of a dashboard for metric beat logs. So basically, we actually have, we are working on creating a metric solution for Logz.io. This will cover mostly metric beat. However, in this webinar, we don't really have the time to go over that, but it's something that we are working on, and we will have a solution that will specifically fit Kubernetes logs, in the future APM as well. And metric beat is one of the shippers that we support. So there's also a question on what is timeline. They saw it on the left side. So timeline is basically Kibana's take on data series. It's a whole new webinar by itself to work on timeline. However, it does have some capabilities that are not too user-friendly. It has its own syntax that you can check out. It's open source. I would suggest actually moving to Kibana's updated timeline is something called Visual Builder, which is a more friendly based, I would say, timeline under the time series. You can just achieve a lot of what timeline offers using a UI. We might cover this in a future webinar. Any more questions? If you can create a visualization that allows to cross-reference between two indices, example like metric data queried with file-bit data. So you could achieve that. The way to achieve that, though, is to have some sort of a common field that would appear in both logs. So let's say you have a host name or an IP address. So you would need something to be connected, since Elasticsearch is not an SQL-based, it's not a SQL-based database. We can't really create the keys ourselves. But if you have a single field that appears in both logs, in both the metric beat or the file beat and the logs/logs, you could create this kind of dashboard where with a single filter, you basically filter both data sets. You just need to have this common, one common field to connect between them. Yeah, I got this one. Recording of this training will be sent to you if you signed up. Obviously you have, and you can also find it in our academy. So actually, since you're going to receive this presentation, if you want to check out a bit more about Logz.io, we have our blog that you can check out, the complete ELK guide. You can sign up for a free trial for 2 weeks. And our Logz.io Academy is basically this webinar as well as our previous webinars can be found there. which is a self-paced online learning platform. So if you missed any of our prior webinars, it is available for you there, along with other resources like complete courses and how to use Logz.io with the use cases and the story behind them. We have lots of how-to guides over there and a lot more. And you can also find a lot of information under our Logz.io documentation with a bit more in-depth documentation over there. Just going through, browsing a bit through more questions. There's a question on how to set the time range for the dashboard for all visualization. So as soon as I go into the dashboard, we have the time picker on the right side, and this determines the time frame that the dashboard is referring to. So if I change the time frame over here, it will basically affect all the visualizations. And there's no way to have the visualizations represent their own time frame and not include that into the consideration of the time frame. So when you select here from the time picker and you change the time frame, all the visualizations will be affected by that time frame. Okay, I think that's it. I don't see any more questions. So thank you for tuning in, and please join us in our next webinar.